So today we'll start off taking a look at the economy. It's a huge one. It's a basis upon which if you don't get that right, you can be rest assured that there'll be many unhappy people and unhappy faces moving around the country. So we do have a little bit of a background of what transpired in the economy, after which we'll kick off our discussion. Have a look.
The Nigerian president, Muhammadu Buhari's first election in 2015 and his re-election in 2019 were hinged on three pillars of anti-corruption, insecurity, and the economy.
The new administration will intensify its efforts in security, restructuring the economy, and fighting corruption.
Riding now into another 4 years in the saddle, anti-corruption and insecurity have combined and embedded into the broad economy, forming the defining identity of the Buhari's administration. As the president begins another term in office, they discuss about the state of the economy, business and investment, and the financial markets have become more stringent and urgent than ever before. One of the president's economic managers believes the administration is on course.
The Federal Executive Council is most encouraged by the fact that growth continues to be driven by the non-oil sector, which affects most of our population. Also, agriculture grew by 3.17%, and this represents the strongest growth in agriculture since the fourth quarter 2017.
For the private sector, the government has managed to score some points, such as navigating the brutal foreign exchange market downturn of 2015 and the attendant economic recession of 2016.
We need to mainstream the private sector players. I mean, we have a procurement policy, for instance. We have presidential executive orders that talks about the fact that agencies of government should patronize what is made in Nigeria and all of that. But how much of that is being enforced?
But if President Buhari's mantra about corrupt practices of the previous government and the poor handling of insecurity in the north was anything to go by, today he faces the same challenges that are earning his administration some hard knocks. President Buhari is confronting a much weaker Boko Haram insurgency, but a new wave of bloody communal clashes and banditry in the country's food basket, putting pressure on agricultural output and the economy.
The MPC called for a close monitoring of the uptick in inflationary pressures in April 2019, driven largely by food shortages during the Easter season, the commencement of the planting season, as well as persisting security challenges in some of the food-producing regions of the country.
Standing up for a second inauguration, President Buhari can beat his chest in a number of areas that include social investment programs, nearly 5 trillion naira spending on road and belt infrastructure, fiscal prudence, and payment of salaries and pensions. However, massive unemployment remains. Sustainable electricity still a pipe dream, combining with weak real productivity and sluggish purchasing power. All together, increasing the mystery index, resulting in an alarming rate of crimes and suicides. Looking towards 2023, President Buhari's government will also have to work hard to secure billions of dollars in both local and foreign investments, urgently required to set the economy on a path of sustainable and inclusive growth beyond oil. Bosin Omofaye, Channels Television News.
So that is some background of what and how perhaps the economy has fared in the last 4 years. So but to break it down and shed some light on the report which you've just seen by a business editor, Bosin Omofaye. We've got some gentlemen here with us in the studios. We're right here in Lagos. Dr. Andrew Nevin is partner and economist at PwC Nigeria. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Good morning. Great to be here.
All right, and in Abuja, we have Dr. Ayokunu Ojeni, who is the member of Presidential Council on Ease of Doing Business. So he will be here to also tell us the policies, explain to them, I mean, when we do get feedback from you in terms of how that has performed. Dr. Jenny, thank you for joining us as well from Abuja. Dr. Nevin, let me start with you. I haven't seen that report. I mean, yes, 4 years, that's quite a while, quite some time. It's for any policy to kick in and have some effect. But from what you've seen, could you give us your assessment of how you think the economy has fared in the last 4 years?
Well, I think Bosen's report expressed it quite well, which is, I mean, we all understand what happened in 2016 and the big oil price crash, and we were not prepared for that. But we've had 4 years. Oil prices are actually quite good the last 2 years, but we continue to grow at lower than the population growth rate. So we got poor in 2015, we got a lot poor in 2016, poor in 2017, poor in 2018. Oof. We're getting poor in 2019, and our dear friends at the IMF said we're going to get poor in 2020. Poor in 2021 and poor in 2022. So I think that we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to break out of this? To put this in context, we look at a country like China, which grew at 8 to 10% for 30 years. Now it's slowed down to 6%. And we look at a country like India, which is growing 7 or 8%. There's no reason, given all the incredible capabilities we have of Nigerians and also all of the resources that we have around the country and the potential industries, we should be growing at 8 or 10%. And of course, but PwC perspective, we put out very clearly that we think the minimum growth rate to alleviate poverty and to reduce unemployment is 6 to 8%, and that's what we need to target.
So is population the problem? Are we making policies that are good, yes, but slow, not enough to meet up with the teeming population of the country?
Well, I think we could have another debate. The country's never really debated the population growth issue. It's not something we wanted to necessarily bring in as PwC. If you read the ERGP, actually on one page of it, maybe page 90 if I remember right, the government does say they want to examine the growth rate of population and think about policies, but I've never seen any implementation of that. But whatever our population growth rate is, we need to grow the economy faster than that. So, I mean, one way, which would take time, would be to reduce the population growth rate. The other way is to grow the economy faster. But as I said, we should be growing at least 6 to 8%, and that will alleviate poverty. So I think that as we come into the next administration, we need to think about how do we move from 2%, because 2% is simply not good enough, to 2% up to that 6 to 8%.
So is it the policies that we've made, the implementation of it, or a combination of both?
Well, I think the position the PwC has taken is there's been a tremendous effort around ease of doing business, and PEBEC has done a fantastic job. Dr. Jamoke, the minister, and the vice president have really focused on that, and there's been a lot of progress. But what there has not been is any structural changes. It's very difficult to point to any real structural decision that's been made in this administration. So the obvious ones that's talked about are the fuel subsidy, maybe good or bad, the CBN Forex, but even issues around the power sector, issues around the way NMPC operates. These are all things that probably need some structural adjustment to them, and there hasn't been any structural changes. The other issue is, I was earlier this week in Oyo State, and I met the governor-elect Makinda, who I think is being inaugurated today. Yeah. He had a fantastic session for investors, and he sent the very clear message that said, Oyo's open for business. I, as governor, will run an administration that supports business. And I think one message that we have not heard from the federal government is, what's the role of the states? I mean, we need if you go back to unemployment for a minute, our position is we need to create 3 to 4 million jobs a year. And you heard Minister Anelma come out 2 days ago, I think, and say that he thinks that the federal government, we can create 20 million jobs over the next administration, which would be fantastic. But to create that many jobs means that we need to create jobs in every single state, which means we need every single governor to be on board about that. So I saw Governor-elect Makinda. I was out a few weeks ago in Edo State, for example, Governor Obaseki, Governor Adeosun, who's retiring now, Ogun State, they've been very focused on it. So there have been some states in the vanguard and others, but we need all 36 states to create employment. So it has an implication. What is the federal government doing to give the states the room and the support they need to enact their policies?
Well, let's get to Dr. Ayokuno Jenny, who is a member of Presidential Council on Ease of Doing Business. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Dr. Jenny, thank you again for joining us today. But shed some light in terms of what the ease of doing business has set out to achieve, because look, there are people who just feel we don't feel the impact of payback in terms of what you've been doing. So could you break the ice, your objectives, and the kind of feedback you're getting in terms of how you're performing?
Thank you, Chamberlain, and thank you for giving me, better today, for gifting me the doctorate degree you've just given unto me. Well, payback was established in 2016, July, essentially because we admit that there's a challenge in the business climate environment, and it was important that we put some focus on the issues that face businesses. And the reason for this is not far-fetched. When you look at the structure of our economy, you see that just about 8% of the GDP is attributable to government spending. And so the bulk of the activities in the economy stems from the private sector. And we understand that if we successfully remove the constraints that businesses face on a daily basis, not only would the GDP grow, we would also see increased employment and other fiscal and macroeconomics indicators would improve. And so that was the decision, that businesses play a vital role in the economy, and it was important for us to remove the constraints to doing business, and so that businesses can fully unleash the potentials and take Nigeria to the desired destination. And so over the past 3 years, what payback has been able to do was to implement a raft of reforms that would deliver on this mandate. And I should say that the work of payback is situated in the overall plan of the government, economic plan of the government, in the economic recovery and growth plan. And there are three main pillars to that plan. One is to restore growth, because, of course, as Dr. Nevin spoke earlier on, in 2016, Nigeria went into a recession, and it was important, first of all, for the government to restore growth. And once you've restored growth, then you can now find all the economic indicators go to the right direction that you want. And so essentially, well, that's what we've been able to do, implemented a number of about 140 reforms. And the World Bank in its Doing Business report acknowledged that over the last 3 years, Nigeria has moved 24 places, which average 8 points uptick in every year. And this is very, very instructive, because 8 years preceding 2015, Nigeria lost 64 points on the ease of doing business. In other words, Nigeria lost 8 points every year, and in the last 3 years, we've gained those 3 years. And the impact on business, perception often lags reality. And we understand that businesses still grapple with these challenges, but it must be said that these challenges didn't begin today. And in 3 years, we will not be able to eradicate all the problems that had faced this country over the decades past. But what we can say is that we are moving in the right direction. And in economics, trend is important. You'd see that in the last GDP report that was issued, Nigeria has the strongest first quarter GDP growth. While 2% might not essentially be what we want to go, but the trend speaks to the direction we want to go. And we believe that in the next 4 years, the administration will intensify the efforts, continue to do the things that will deliver on the mandate that we have to do. We've got to continue our investment in infrastructure. We have to see that the structural reforms that Dr. Nevin spoke about will be intensified. And it's important to say that these structural reforms were not implemented as much as Dr. Nevin were, not because we do not know we needed to do this. But when you have economic confronted recession, you've got to creatively and constructively implement these reforms so that these reforms would not essentially constrain growth in the short term.
So concerning the structural changes, which Dr. Nevin highlighted and which you also touched on a bit, give us, paint a picture for us. So what exactly is it that you've identified needs to be done? What has been done? What's the target? What do you want to achieve?
First of all, we understand that fiscal consolidation is very, very important. And I should say the reason why this is, when economies go into recession, there are a number of two broad things you need to look at. You need to look at your monetary policy and your fiscal policy. On the fiscal side, you want to think about stimulus, stimulating the economy. But the situation we found ourselves in 2015 is that government revenues were at its lowest point. And so the headroom that you would have to pump a lot of money to stimulate the economy wasn't so much. And this must be said because countries that have often gotten out of recession embarked on massive stimulus package. I remember that when America got into recession in 2008, America spent about 7% of its GDP reflating the economy. Nigeria, we didn't have so much of that because government revenues was down. So fiscal consolidation is very important. We understand that tax to GDP ratio is low, and efforts are on the way to get that to happen. And there are some of the reforms we also like to see around the trading and cross-border initiative. For example, what we need to do around the national single window. And it's gladdening to note that about a week ago, the Federal Executive Council approved the framework for the establishment of national single window, which will bring some sanity and improved efficiency at our ports. And of course, that has multiplier effect on the prices of goods and services in the country. So that's one area to look at. We also want to look at how the fraction, what we spend on what. Dr. Nevin spoke about subsidy removal. While, I mean, it is very desirable to free some of the monies that go into subsidy currently into maybe infrastructure spending. It is important to what the government will do is to understand how this will generally impact the take-home pay and the well-being of Nigerian citizens. So that's one area to look at. But it must be said that these reforms will be taken in the context of the growing economic indices. In other words, we are not just going to implement these reforms because it is good enough to do. We will look at the context of time, the impact it would have on Nigerian citizens. And I mean, you would understand that in 2016, the government actually came up with price modulation because we knew that it was important at that point that prices of petroleum products needed to be modulated, and that was done at that instant, and that gave us some respite in terms of subsidy until the price of crude oil increased subsequently. So that kind of method that was adopted in 2016 will be intensified to see that the reforms will be implemented at a time that is best for us to do that.
Dr. Jenny, I'm curious as to what the plan is to expedite business activities for small and medium enterprises. Needless to say, you know very well how important they are in any economy, a lot more than 60% of any economy that is going to grow. So people haven't really seen so much activity in that regard. So beside policies, how do we expedite action such that we can begin to feel the impact within the shortest possible time?
Thank you very much. SMEs play a very vital role. The last MSME survey report that was issued says that 97% of businesses in Nigeria are actually micro businesses. That's about 37 million, about 36 million businesses. So it's important that attention be put on SMEs. But policy is important because that's where you start from. The second thing is to see how those policies would really impact the daily life of the average citizens. One of the things we've done, for example, is that we need to move people from the informal sector. The larger the informal sector in an economy, the greater the constraints the businesses would face. And so one of the things the Corporate Affairs Commission did, for instance, was to see that the cost of incorporating businesses was reduced to about 5,000. And let me tell you why this is very important. That same MSME survey report states that MSMEs in Nigeria, the micro businesses in Nigeria, spend on average of 50,000 startup capital cost. And so the cost of incorporation prior to our coming into government was that you needed a lawyer to do your incorporation, you needed to do some filing, and that easily took the cost of incorporating businesses to about 7,000, which essentially wipes out the startup capital for the average businesses. So what the government said is that we need to, of course, reduce this cost so that the burden businesses would face, the cost of entry into the formal sector will be reduced. And the implication of that is that if you are in the formal sector, there'll be access to credit. If you're in the formal sector, government will know you, and government can articulate its policy to service. So that's one area. We also see what has happened in JEEP, the JEEP funding. Of course, a lot of this made a lot of headlines. Positive headlines, I would say, on the balance, leading to election. And why this was important for us to do, giving market women 10,000. A lot of people have said that this money is small, but when you look at the fact that 10,000 naira eats 20% of the startup capital of the average businesses, you see that these funds will not only unlock the potentials, but it will make a lot of things for us. So SMEs are very important. The development bank that was established in the course of this administration is also a direction towards MSMEs. We understand that development financing is important, access to capital is important, and DBN took off roughly about 2 years ago, and some growth has been seen up around that area. Of course, for the farmers, the CBN has its policy on farmers, giving them subsidizing inputs. So those policies, a raft of those policies, we believe that haven't been implemented. We have learned and seen, and now see what works, what doesn't work. And we believe that in the next 4 years, we have a better picture and better idea of how to retool these reforms so that every single Nigerian will begin to feel the benefits.
All right, Dr. Janiji, thank you very much. But we'd also like to welcome in our Lagos studio a guest who just recently joined us, Mr. Kerry Booker, former chairman, Nigeria Economic Summit Group. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
I'm curious to, if you don't, find out what you think of his opinion about MSMEs in Nigeria, their entry level, the activities of the MSMEs in Nigeria over the past 4 years, what they're able to achieve, what they're not able to achieve. Do you think they even have enough business education to engage in the kind of enterprises that they are into or getting into?
Nigeria, by its very nature, is made up of majorly MSMEs. And the reason is not far-fetched from the realities of what we have found ourselves in. Practically 97–98% of businesses are either one or family-owned businesses. Now, the challenges that MSMEs face in the economy, I mean, there are a number of surveys like EFINA and others that have pointed out a few key issues or challenges they face. One is actually, as indicated by Dr. Ojeni, which is formalizing their status, which is to register the company so that they become, they come into the formal sector. Now, that has been improved upon by the initiative that PEBEC had introduced. Now, the other fundamental things are actually skills necessary to run a business. To me, that is the fundamental key thing about running any sort of business, even if it is just mama put out there selling food. You need to understand that, to run a business profitably, you need to do certain key things. And you need to source your product at a certain cost. You need to add the cost of production or processing of those goods, and then the selling price, so that you have head above water. Now, the fundamentals of that and the understanding of that requires a certain amount of knowledge. We know that some businesses that are passed on, let's say, somebody that's into leather goods or whatever, they tend to actually go through a family, a parent, and then the scion, and then the next generation. Usually those would have stumbled on how to run the business profitably. In some cases, it's very marginal, one little mishap and the business goes under. Of course, then the other thing is access to credit. But in most instances, the credit that these businesses get today, especially in the urban areas, are extremely high interest. I mean, either they go to microfinance banks or any of these fintechs that today are disbursing millions and millions of loans of about 10,000, 20,000 at double-digit interest rates, really, within a month, for a month, So it's really, really expensive,
which is why
for a business to survive.
Which is why many don't even go to the banks in the first place.
They don't even go to the banks because banks are intimidating. You see these massive columns and shiny building that when you step in with the outfit of the local of an MSME owner, they just get intimidated. So they don't even venture in that direction.
So then they
end up dealing with the money lenders.
So then it's a long way from sustenance business to sustainable business.
Correct. And it requires all of those things: skill of running a business, access to finance, and of course the skill requires how you sell, how you produce efficiently, etc., etc. And it is not different from running any other business. The fundamentals of running a business is the same, whether you go to Harvard Business School or you get taught by your parents, right? So essentially that makes the success of micro business or a small and medium enterprise critical. The statistics is also about, available, whereby for every 5 businesses that start, chances are that 4 might not survive within the first 3 years or so, which is practically 80%. So that means 1 out of 5 succeeds. I mean, that's really a dismal statistic to start with.
Let's look at the statistics of foreign direct investment, which we hear is down 36%. I mean, they're saying we're doing better, ease of doing business, and yet we have the FDIs going this way. Well, what could be happening, Mr. Nevin?
Well, I think PEBEC has put a great effort in, as I said, but I mean, we have not got the results. I mean, just to put this in perspective, I think our FDI, foreign direct investment, last year was about $2 billion. We said maybe 2 or 3 years ago that number needed to be $15 to $20 billion to be sufficient for what Nigeria needed. And Ghana last year had $3 billion of foreign direct investment. So foreign investors, multinational companies, are making the decision that they would prefer to put more money into Ghana than into Nigeria. So I think that's quite a dire signal to where we're at. I mean, I just think that, as I said a little earlier, we just have not made enough progress on it. So if we go back to PEBEC for a minute, I mean, I think PEBEC has done a fantastic job on many of these reforms. But if you take something like the single window being that a business can come in and deal with the government through one window. If I understood the PEBEC presentations I've been at, they say, look, there's over 20 agencies, you can now deal with a single window. The question to me is not if there's a single window. The question is, why are there 20 agencies that a business has to deal with? And again, that's a structural issue. No decision's been made to say, actually, we don't need over 20 agencies, we just need 10 or 15 or 8 or whatever the number is. I mean, to put this in perspective, Rwanda, for all its challenges of the 1990s, has now reached 29th on the ease of doing business ranking around the world. Now, that's ahead of France, ahead of Germany, ahead of Israel. So many countries that we view as very great business environments, Rwanda is already there. We continue to be at 146. So I think there's many people that want to do it, but we haven't made some of the hard decisions that are actually going to get there. And the FDI is one indication of it.
So what are those difficult decisions that we have to make?
Well, as I said, you go back to some structural decisions, right? We've kind of made the policy. So, reduce the number of agencies that it has to do. One issue that we've been very clear for the last 2 years is the most important industry or sector to increase increase employment and decrease poverty is real estate. Everyone needs a place to live. Everyone needs a place to do their business. We have a housing deficit of 17 million units. Why are we not getting an explosion in real estate? Well, we're not getting it because there's structural issues around the Land Use Act, the structural issues around the power of governors and the way that land is used. No one is going to invest in their land if they don't know they own the land. No bank is going to lend unless they're clear on who the title is. So unless we unlock some of those issues, all of this other effort is not going to be big enough.
So, Mr. Booker, you agree with Mr.
Completely. One of the key things about the conversation about the foreign direct investment is it's very clear, and it has a lot to do with whether Nigeria as a nation is business friendly or not. Now, the investor has a choice. The choice is to put their money into Nigeria or somewhere else, and money only flows where it's a friendly territory, where you are accepted by the environment that you are going to go invest in. Now, what is happening in Nigeria is that we do pay lip service. I mean, the skip or the progress we made in the ease of doing business is commendable 3 years ago. The momentum fizzled off immediately after that.
Why do you think that happened?
The reason is that change management has certain processes. And once you get that momentum, you're supposed to continue with that. and some of the political will necessary to either collapse those entities or to say to government agencies that if I come in and apply for something and within a certain, give me a timeline, say an SLA, if it is 2 weeks, if in those 2 weeks I haven't gotten an approval back, it means that it's granted. If there is no objection, then it means that I have gotten the approval, and then you move on. That's how some of the Central Eastern European states that came out of the old Soviet unions did in terms of tackling corruption and also upgrading themselves for ease of doing business. I think we in NESG brought in one former prime minister who actually shared his story. And that was one of the reasons why PEBEC itself was formed. Now, the story is that needs to come from the top. And you need to be relentless in the pursuit of making life easier for businesses to conduct themselves.
I think we should go back to Mr. Denny to react to some of the responses you've heard here on the ease of doing business.
Yeah. Well, specifically, Dr. Jenny, if I could just bust
Thank you very much for your comment.
Yeah, but my apologies, Dr. Jenny. Particularly, the window. Is government having that conversation regarding why do we have 28 agencies in the first instance? Yes, we know about the executive orders, but is there something being done about reducing all of them?
Thank you, Chamberlain. Yes, we once had 28 agencies at the port, but that number has come down to 9 agencies right now. And that's one of the first steps to do. And one of the reasons why we had that high number in the first instance was because legislation sometimes gave these agencies the power to be at the port. But what we did in the administration was to look at what administrative processes can help us achieve. And there was an order given about 18 months ago that has brought that number down to 9. And not just that, what we've also said is that the Nigerian Customs Service must be the leading agency at the port. So the Nigerian Customs Agency does the inspections, and if NAFDAC needs to now inspect some consignments, it's the Customs Service that will make that happen. But all of that process is still being done now, but the National Single Window is going to bring some more efficiency to that. And like I said, the Federal Executive Council about a week ago approved the National Single Window framework, and the Vice President will chair the steering committee to see that automation is brought into that process so that the time of clearing goods and services would significantly reduce. Dr. Levin spoke rightly about the Land Use Act, the reforms around registering property, dealing with construction permits. But I say that reform sits entirely within the purview of the state government. And so as much as we put pressure on the federal government, we must also engage our states. And it was in realization of that at PEBEC that the federal government gave us the mandate to start the subnational program about a year ago. And the goal was to engage state government, get to see what they're doing, and give them some level of advice in implementing some of those reforms. And the latest World Bank subnational report says that 32 states in Nigeria out of 36 made some form of reforms towards the direction. So this journey is, the destination is still far away, but the journey has begun, and we're in the right direction. And real estate is very important. If we get, what we've also done in terms of administration is to engage Lagos State and Kano State, for example. In Kano State, the governor authorized the Attorney General to now sign certificates of occupancy on his behalf, reducing the time in that regard. Lagos State also successfully reduced the infrastructure development charge, which constituted about 6 million naira in the cost of registering warehouses in Lagos State. That's some of the things that had been done in the recent months, and we believe that as this policy has started in Lagos State, for example, businesses will begin to feel its effect subsequently. So the direction is that we understand these problems, and sometimes you need legislation to move in the right direction. For example, getting credit. We know that it's difficult to get credit in Nigeria, and one of the our reasoning was that we needed to put in the right legislation. And so what PEBEC was able to achieve in 2017 was to pass the Secure Transaction Immovable Assets Act, which made it possible for micro businesses to give their movable property as collateral. The practice generally is that you need landed property to be able to access loans and the banks. What we did was to bring legislation that made it now possible for you to use your farm produce, to use your machinery as collateral for doing business. Of course, the reality of the banks may not have changed, but it would not change without that legislation. So the first plank was to bring that legislation, and now, having had that legislation, we will move to the next phase, engaging the banks, and of course, monetary policy would also move in the right direction to make the reality felt by the everyday Nigerian.
But Dr. Jenny, if you say that hasn't changed concerning the land aspect regarding the banks, what exactly, is there a timeline? Are you reaching out to the banks? What kind of feedback are you getting from them?
I mean, as Dr. Ervin and Wood know, monetary policy is simply that of the central bank government, the Central Bank of Nigeria to do. So I wouldn't really want to delve into that area. But what I can tell you is that with the right legislation in place, if you don't have the legislation, practice cannot move. So the first thing to do, which the executive arm of government was able to do, sponsoring a bill and having the president accent to it, is that you need to have that right legislation in place. Now, banks have a number of issues to compare with. Of course, the minimum MRR recently was reduced. So those issues come into play in, access to capital. And of course, also, we must find ways of de-risking lending to the micro businesses. First of all, if you're in the informal sector, there's no way you can get the funding that you need because you're not even registered. We don't know your address. So the plan is to de-risk the MSMEs so that the banks will be enabled to advance this credit. And getting them into the formal sector is very important. Of course, not because everybody doesn't register a business every time. A lot of people would say, okay, how does this affect me? For those who are entering into the business cycle newly, that registration of business, for example, matters a great deal. We also see some state governments, like Kaduna State, part of our engagement with them. Kaduna State has been able to harmonize taxes, and that has reduced some form of burden that businesses face in that area. The next phase is our engagement with the Joint Tax Board to see that taxes are harmonized, so that people would find it easy, not just easy to pay taxes, but they would have to deal with fewer number of agencies in that collection of tax. And I should say that bulk of the multiple taxation that we find in Nigeria sits within the state government. And the direction is to properly engage them. National Economic Council, as you know, in the last 4 years has met quite periodically. And we see that the Joint Tax Board is already working in that direction, and we hope and we know that in the next 4 years, more attention will come into multiple taxation, in getting states to see the benefits in harmonizing the taxes so that the average businesses will feel the impact.
Even though at the moment there hasn't been any change concerning multiple taxation, because we see these things on a regular basis, but the next 4 years, as you say, hopefully there will be some change. But Dr. Nevin, let me bring it back to you. While we also expect you to comment on what he said about from 28 agencies, they've made it up to 9 now. But the kind of engagement that government is having, federal government is having with the states, is it those ones that he's highlighted, are those the kind of conversations that they should be having, or what do you think?
Yes, no, first off, let me just say, I think PEBEC has actually done a very good job. Again, I'll repeat that. I mean, the minister, Dr. Jenny, Dr. Jamoke, they've done a fantastic job, but they've done it in the context, again, of not enough structural changes. So when I made the comment over 20 agencies, I meant all the agencies you dealt with. So now we've got you dealing with 9 agencies for just the customs. Right? I mean, that to me is I mean, it's some progress, but it's not enough progress. I think one way to look at this is 65% of the Nigerian economy is informal. And Dr. Ojeni and Dr. Bakar made it very clear. We want to bring the informal economy into the formal economy. Now, why are the people in the informal economy? They've made a choice to stay in the informal economy because it's superior for them to stay in it. Overall, we'd be better off if we got more in the informal. So the question is, what's that transition into that? And I think that the cost of going to the formal economy in terms of time, in terms of money, is still too high. So the CIC reducing the cost of registering corporations is fantastic. But we need to do a lot more of that to keep bringing that cost down, because the tax base will not go up while we have the informal economy. But the engagement of the PEBEC with the state, the subnational or the state governments, as I said earlier in the program, the states need to do so much here. So the fact that PEBEC is now supporting them is great. I wish it had happened right at the beginning of PEBEC, not just a year ago. But I then think we need to ask the question, what right, how do we need some structural changes to the rights that states have? Because if I understand the Constitution, there's 68 areas that are reserved for the federal government. How many of them could the state should be taking on? And to give you one, maybe controversial one, the way that energy technology has moved, it's a much more local thing, right? I mean, energy can be produced by gas at a lower scale. Obviously, we've got off-grid solar. We have had a very poor 4 years in terms of energy production. We had the news 2 weeks ago that the national grid has essentially collapsed. So we've gone backwards in energy. What would happen if you just said to the state, you sort out your own energy. And if you need to trade energy with neighboring states, you sort it out. I don't think we could be any worse off than we are now.
Legislature, the National Assembly,
yeah, I think that's what the difficult comes in, because, I
Assembly.
mean, NESG, you interface with government, private sector, so perhaps you have an understanding of terms of why these things are the case. So why is it that they've not been having this conversation? If they have, we haven't seen any change. The Land Use Act, for instance, the state will tell you, no, this is no go area. We are in charge. The federal government can't do anything concerning that unless the law changes. The same thing with power. Why are they not having these conversations?
The conversation around power is critical. I have this expression of saying power is the most powerful factor in any developing economy. Let me give you an example. We had entire nationwide collapse of our power system over 3 times this year, just from January to date. I think we had 3 or 4 incidences. And if you scan the whole world, there are only 3 or 4 countries that have had that sort of or similar experience. One is Venezuela, and you don't want to go and equate yourself into the neighborhood of Venezuela. But that is really how critical power is in the current context of discussion. So there was a discussion about energy and energy pricing, which includes fuel subsidy, but also proper power tariffs so that investors can come in. The second is actually the issue of who controls what. And true to form, all the IPPs are done by private sector, and they usually have a very short duration time in terms of implementation and bringing the project from start to finish. And they are small, off-grids or microgrids, as the people call them. They have little capital compared to a huge hydro plant, which might take 4 or 5 years to build. And if people are empowered to produce that much power, we will see pockets of them in some of the critical areas where we know some industrial clusters.
But they can't until the laws change.
They have to, and we need to either have a short circuit the whole process of saying, okay, either through an executive order or from the point of view of the constitution reform, or whatever.
But that's the foundation.
Constitutional changes take time, unfortunately. But we need to have some understanding of saying that these things are not going to be challenged. And it is for all collective best interest anyway. So we need to do something quick.
Is it tenable if they say, look, our hands are tied because of the discos, the agreements that the government has with discos, and so if they were to go in and change all of that, we'll be sending the wrong signal to investors?
I think we started even the privatization of the discos without thinking through the consequences, because if you are to sell an asset, there has to be a service level agreement between the buyer, or rather the investor, and the government, who used to own 100% of those assets. Now, they came in thinking that some of the conditions were for them to invest further in the discos to ensure that they can collect the revenues that would be generated and so on and so forth. Now, those have not been done. And if there is a way for you to be penalized if you haven't made the proper investments or whatever, then that incentive, whether positive or negative, would force you to reconsider before you make the purchase, or if you're making the purchase, you make the purchase such that there would be enough capital that you can inject, or list or look for other investors so that you would make, do with the investment. Because literally taking a disco is, we now found out, is basically, getting dogs with fleas, really.
Dr. Buka, is it possible or is it reasonable? I mean, you said that the process of changing the laws to make things faster, it's the trip to changing the laws is it
but it
reasonable? It will be done, hopefully.
No, it can be done.
It can be done, yeah. But is it reasonable to advocate for a partnership between the federal government and the state governments at different levels?
Correct. And also to have a sense of urgency. You see, when you want to change a country, and the manner in which you want to make progress, there are things that egos would be put aside. And you invite the state governors, now I'm talking from the point of view of Mr. President, and sit down and say, look, here are 2 or 3 critical things we need to fix. I know the Constitution forbids us from doing this. Can we collectively agree to do this? And then we issue executive orders. And that may be a good start, right? And then we move on.
Okay.
I must say that the ministry said they partnered with the private sector to electrify markets containing tens of thousands of family-run-up shops, secured $550 million in funding from the African Development Bank as well, also the World Bank for rural electrification, some of the concessions with regards to providing power for the people.
Right, but those are the kind of things that you need to do in large numbers. Once the environment is attractive, you don't need an ADB, or they can be a part of the solution to the problem. But what you do is that when it is attractive enough that you and I can collectively invest in a power plant in a market, or in a community space, or in an estate, then you begin to put less pressure on the national grid, and by extension, longer periods of power.
Can we say that this administration has done more than previous administrations?
Indeed, when it comes to infrastructure, there has been some investments made. The problem is that our starting position has been dismal. So when you are coming, when you are in a hole, coming out to that level field is going to be challenging. But what I would advocate for is that sense of momentum was fizzling out, and we need to double up. And it can be achieved, but the political will is necessary.
And this question is from someone, Emmanuel Oisamoje, and he's saying this, that the ease of registering businesses in Nigeria has been hampered. He said by some elements in the CAC, maybe a cabal, he says, who deliberately block online registration process and divert those registering businesses to some registration agent for a fee.
Well, thank you, Manuel, for that comment. This is new to us, but what I would advise is that we understand that there might be some infraction here and there, and that's why the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council established the reportgov.ng platform. It's a web-based and mobile web-based application, and also is available on the Android Play Store. And the goal is that when you have such complaints, you are advised to kindly go to www.reportgov.ng, or just download reportgov.ng app on your mobile phone, and you can lodge that complaint against some of the agencies already listed. And I can tell you that Corporate Affairs Commission is listed on that platform. Kindly please avail yourself of that opportunity. Please lodge that complaint, and you are certain, and you'll be sure that within 72 hours, somebody's going to respond to you, and your complaints will be treated. And this applies to a number of other agencies, immigration, customs service, Civil Aviation Authority. So please, if you have any such complaints, kindly go to that platform, www.reportgov.ng, and lodge your complaint, and you can be sure someone on the other end is going to respond to your complaint.
Right, so here's what we'll do. Dr. Jenny, we will get your email. So if we get any more of some of those comments, we'll forward them to you so that you can respond, because we're winding down now on this segment. And gentlemen, I know the country could use a lot of economic policies moving forward, and there are many of them. But what would you like to see this government focus, almost, as we say, hit the ground running? Dr. Nevin.
Well, I think Dr. Bukhar put it best, is what we need is an urgency. I mean, I think in the 10 years that I've been here, there has been massive progress. I think there's a really deep understanding of the importance of the private sector, that Nigeria needs to be attractive to capital, both to foreign capital and domestic capital, that we need to make doing business easier, we need to support businesses, we need to bring people from the informal sectors. So that understanding is much deeper than 10 years ago. But I think this, and we had Governor Lalong from Plateau State speaking a little earlier. You could see he's talking about diversification, value chains, et cetera. So I think that's there. But I think, as Dr. Bukhar put it, there needs to be an urgency. This administration needs to wake up every single day and say, that is what we're going to focus on, and we're going to break down all the barriers until we get there.
Mr. Booker, the employment figures are intimidatingly scary. What should government done expeditiously to bring down the numbers as quickly as possible?
It's just a repeat of what I had said. And look, the tone of leadership is going to be set immediately after the inauguration, and we're going into a state where Mr. President is going to leave a legacy. This is the final chance of him running Nigeria, and therefore things ought to be done, and ought to be done fast. It's easier to actually make mistakes quickly so that you correct it, and people would know that sense of urgency, starting from forming a cabinet of at least half filled up with technocrats. For example, the last cabinet, or the current cabinet that just got dissolved or handing over yesterday, there was not an economist. Not a single economist in either finance, national planning, or trade and investment. Well, in trade and investment, at least it's an investment banker. I can forgive that. but generally speaking, we have to set the tone up there that Mr. President is not happy with how the slowness of progress in the country, and for him to take that leadership role, he needs to do these things fast. And that would cascade down to the length and breadth.
So who knows? Could the president have given us an idea of what to expect when he said in one of his recent interviews that, well, they call me Baba Go Slow, but I will shock people. I will surprise people this time around. So who knows? But we'll keep tabs on that and see what happens. But that's how far we can go on this segment. Dr. Andrew Nevin, our partner and economist with PwC Nigeria. We also did have Dr. Kerry Booker, former chairman, Nigeria Economic Summit Group. And in Abuja, we were joined by Dr. Ayokunu Ojeni, a member of Presidential Committee, Presidential Council on Ease of Doing Business in Nigeria. Gentlemen, thank you all.